Hey folks, DusT here, and welcome back to the channel. In this video, I wanted to address the major format that we use for Counter-Strike. And this is a topic that has come up time and time again over the years when it comes to talking about the pros and cons of the format that the major uses. And obviously, the big news that we got very recently was that the Starlight or Budapest major would be featuring a best-of-5 grand final, and that would be the format going forward. And this is, no doubt, a positive change, a change that everyone had been hoping for quite some time, and it is positive, and I want to give props to Valve for finally making the step, because this is huge. This is definitely what we've been needing and wanting in the Counter-Strike majors for quite some time now, ever since best of 5 grand finals became the norm, which has really been the case throughout the entirety of CS2, with the MR12 format really making that more possible and more viable, and we've seen really everyone latch on to that. And yeah, it's positive stuff, but I do think that we are still missing a very big change that we need to the majors, and that is, of course, getting rid of best of ones. Now, before I get deeper into this topic, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, leave a like, leave a comment. All these things help the channel grow. But without further ado, let's kind of get into this topic. So indeed, here was the article that announced the change that we would be having a best of 5 grand final, as it was announced that Starlight Budapest would be the first major to culminate with the best of 5 grand final. And they announced this back on November 4th, and it was something that the community had been calling for quite some time, to get in line with the rest of the circuit, as best of 5 grand finals have become the norm. And so this will be the first time, but it will also impact future majors, because you can see by the language here that it says that it would now feature best of 5 grand finals beginning with this event. So all majors going forward will be having this 5 grand final. And again, this is a super positive change. We've already talked about how it is in line with all the other tournaments we see in the circuit, how it makes a lot of sense with MR12, how, there is just a lot of benefit to having, more games played, the better chance you're going to find the better team. And there's really not too much else to add to this other than that, yeah, best of 5 grand finals are awesome. And I am really happy to see that we are going to be having best of 5s now going forward in the majors. And now I kind of want to talk a little bit about major formats over time. Go all the way back. We had the first major happen at DreamHack Winter 2013. And if you look at this major, obviously it featured, I believe, 16 teams. And the format of this was actually 4 groups of 4. And if you look at it, it was all best of ones at this point in time, going through every single match. So GSL, best of ones all the way through. You did not play best of 3s until you got to the playoffs, when, of course, everything was going to be a BO3. So that is where we started. So if you compare that to now, certainly things have gotten a lot better. Now, it was DreamHack Open Cluj-Napoca in 2015 where we really saw kind of one of our first changes in the major format, and that was that it was still indeed the 4 groups of 4 system, GSL, that we had seen in the past, but while the opening and elimination and winners matches were BO1s, they made the decider matches BO3s. And so basically what that meant is that you could win 2 BO1s and make it to the playoffs, as we see, just for an example, LG beating Cloud9, beating Fnatic in BO1s. They were able to go ahead and see themselves into the playoffs that way. And the elimination match was also BO1. So Vex, in this case, lost 2 best of 1s. To Fnatic and to Cloud9, so they got knocked out. But then they made the decider match, so the second team coming out of the groups, into a BO3. And so this is kind of the first time we saw a pivot to adding a BO3 in the group stage system. So a step in the right direction, but still far from ideal, obviously, by, today's standards, and even, eventually bigger tournaments around that same time, having to go at this whole best of 1 only business. And so essentially, after having 6 majors with BO1s only, and then we had Cluj-Napoca adding the BO3 for the decider match, we essentially saw this kind of persist as well for Columbus and for Cologne. But then at the E-League major in Atlanta is when we actually moved to the Swiss system. And once again, though, we went where it was all BO1s through the entire Swiss system. No BO3s were played until you got into the playoffs. And so you went through all this, and that was kind of the pivot to Swiss. And we've been using the Swiss system in majors ever since. Now, after a few majors, we got to the Face It major that took place in 2018, and this is where we saw the Swiss system did add a BO3 to it. So you could still go 3-0 in BO1s to make it to the playoffs. Same with 3-1 teams would still obviously also only play BO1s to make it to the playoffs. But when it came to these 3-2 teams, then that final game was indeed going to be a best of 3 in round 5. Now, this still meant you could go 0-3 in best of 1s and get knocked out. You could go 1-3 in best of 1s and get knocked out. But for that kind of middle of the pack situation where you're deciding who's going to go 3-2 or who's going to go 2-3, we did finally add some BO3s in that round, and that is that. And it was at the IEM Katowice Major in 2019 that we get to the format that we see today, where it is still the Swiss system, but now BO3s would be played for any match that would advance you to the next stage or to playoffs, or eliminate you from the tournament. So as you could see, whenever we had the new challenger stage in this tournament, NRG, when they went 3-0 to make it past this stage, they did have to play a best of 3 on their third game, as opposed to being able to go 3-0 with best of 1s only. And then elimination-wise, again, you couldn't go 0-3 in BO1s. You did have to play a best of 3 in your final game. And for the entire stage, you would be faced with this, where any game that eliminated you from the tournament would be a BO3. Any game that would advance you to the next stage, to stage 2, the legend stage, would be a BO3. And then obviously once you got to the legend stage, it was the same thing. And to advance yourself to the playoffs, you would have to win a best of 3 to do it. At some point, maybe you have to play through multiple best of 3s if you were kind of in this 3-2 or 2-3 situation. But yeah, that is when we finally made it to BO3s being used for all advancement and elimination games. Now, spoiler alert, for now, the last 9 or 10 majors and going into the Budapest major, right now we're looking at the Blast Austin major, last one we just played, we're using the exact same thing. We have been using this format now for the last 6 years, where we are doing, the opening rounds are BO1s, and then your decider or elimination match is a BO3, and that is how we have done it, again, now for the last 9 or 10 majors. I can't remember the exact number. And so that is how dated we are at this point, in my opinion, because we are essentially using the same format we use in a different version of the game that we played back in 2019, a different format where we're using MR15 instead of MR12, and we have also just seen the entire scene level up the formats that are being used for top tier tournaments. Let's take a look at what the rest of the scene is doing. So for PGL, this has been the case all year for all PGL events. This is not talking about CAC events where PGL covers the English broadcast, but actual PGL events. All of them have used the exact same format, where it is the Swiss system, just like the majors, but everything is a BO3. All the games are BO3s, and then obviously once you get into playoffs, it's a single elimination bracket, BO3s being played until the grand final, where it is a best of 5. Now, if we look at Blast, when it comes to the Blast Open events, while they did use an online closed qualifier for the most recent version of Blast Open, usually Blast Opens have gone with this 8-team GSL group system, where you are going to play best of 3s the entire way forward. Then once you get into the playoffs, the team that won their group would automatically get seeded into the semifinals, and then the teams that came second and third in their groups would go into the quarterfinals, and then it would be BO3s up until the grand final, where you would have a best of 5. Then you look at the Blast Rivals tournament, and this is an 8-team tournament, again using GSL groups, each group having 4 teams, all matches being best of 3s, and then obviously, again, the winners of the group would make it straight to the semifinals, and then the second and third place teams from these groups would go to the quarterfinals, again, these all being BO3s, so the grand final, which is the best of 5. Now, we'll take a look at IM Chengdu, a tournament that's going on right now as I'm recording this video, and their format is very similar to what you just saw with Blast, and this has been a format that they have been doing for quite some time with IAMs, where, again, you have 2 groups of 8. You are playing the GSL style, where it's double limb bracket, and you are playing best of 3s all the way through. The team that comes first automatically gets dropped into the semifinal, and then the other 2 teams will get dropped into quarterfinals matchups, and you're playing BO3s from that point forward until the grand final, which is best of 5. IM Cologne earlier this year was essentially the same thing, the only difference being that they had to play in to get into the main tournament, where once again, it was BO3s only for the play-in portion. But once you get to the main tournament, it's the same concept, 8 teams in each group, GSL bracket style, best of 3s only, double elim, winners making semis, of each group, and then the second, third place teams going to the quarterfinals, and then BO3s until the grand finals, which is best of 5. Now, when you go to EPL, this is the most recent season of EPL that we just played, they used a Swiss system for their stages, and they did it exactly how PGL does their Swiss, where everything is a best of 3 in the Swiss. This is stage 1, then obviously you had stage 2, once again, best of 3s all the way through in the Swiss system. Then you get to the playoffs, single elim bracket, best of 3s all the way through, except for the grand final, which is a best of 5. So, as you can see, the entire scene right now for Tier 1 Counter-Strike is doing best of 3s only in some form or fashion. And so with that said, it is a little bit sad to see the majors, which are supposed to be the biggest and most prestigious tournaments in our circuit, are lagging behind with an inferior format. Now, again, I do applaud Valve for adding a best of 5 grand final. That is huge. That's a great step in the right direction. I also applaud them over the years stepping up the format of the tournament. You know, again, I talked about how in the early days it was best of 1s only, you know, and then eventually we evolved into like having a BO3 for a decider match. We eventually evolved into a Swiss system where it was all BO1s. Then we eventually had, you know, the situation where it was BO1s up until the decider game for that round 5, where those would become best of 3s. And then we got to the point where we're at now, where, you know, you are going to be guaranteed to play at least one BO3 on your way out the tournament when you're facing elimination, or a BO3 when you're now deciding whether or not you're going to promote to the next stage or playoffs, depending on where you're at in the tournament. And so we have come a long way over the years, and I definitely applaud Valve for that. But now, once again, Valve is lagging behind, using the same format for the last 6 years, and so for the last 9 to 10 majors, whereas everyone else has gone no BO1s at all in any other format on LAN. And some people will say, well, it's a logistical issue, because when they added a best of 5 grand final for this upcoming major and for all majors going forward, you didn't really change anything about the schedule. The grand finals day is still its own day, as it has been, a day dedicated to the grand finals. And so really all that you have done to move from a best of 3 in the grand finals to a best of 5 in the grand finals is you've potentially added a couple of extra hours to the day, depending on if it goes all 5 maps or not, or whatever the case may be. And so you're really not changing the logistics of the event very much at all. It just means maybe a few more hours in the venue if it goes all 5 maps compared to a BO3 in the past grand finals, where if it was a 2-0, you'd be out of there in a few hours, maybe have a show match, something else kind of going on before the grand final. But all in all, you know, it would be a shorter day. Whereas now you have potential for a longer day if it goes all 5 maps. So fair enough. But every other stage, with the opening matches being BO1s and then the other matches being BO3s, these are 4-day stages. So as you can see, for this first stage for the Budapest Major, it's scheduled for November 24th through November 27th. So that is the 24th, the 25th, the 26th, and the 27th. So that's 4 days. So you get through stage 1. Then you have a day off. Then stage 2 starts. It's going to last 4 days. Then you have a day off. Stage 3 starts, and that's going to be 4 days, right? Then you have 3 days off, and then the playoffs start. Now, here's the thing. If you did all BO3s and eliminated all BO1s, do you know how much you would actually have to add to make that happen? 1 day per stage. Right now, if you look at the PGL events, because I just know those because that's the ones I've been working, to get through the group stage of a Swiss system with BO3s only, it takes 5 days to play out that group system. So here, you can see it for yourself. We had the Swiss system. Round 1 was on the 26th. We played out round 1. It was basically 4 BO3s on 2 separate streams. So it was 4 BO3s on stream A, 4 BO3s on stream B, right? Round 2 was the 27th, basically the same thing. Round 3 was the 28th, basically the same thing, where, you know, 4 BO3s were ultimately played on the H stream, you know, between the high, mid, and low games. And then the final 2 rounds were only 3 BO3s having to be played that day. Obviously, the high matches were on A stream, low matches were on the B stream, and then the final round, round 5, all of these were on the A stream, and this was the 30th. So, yeah, you're talking about the 26th, the 27th, the 28th, the 29th, and the 30th. 5 days to get through a Swiss system that was all BO3s. So, essentially, all you're asking out of majors going forward in order to get rid of BO1s forever is to essentially add 1 day per stage, and with it currently now being 3 stages for a major, which has been the case with the new VRS system and how they expanded the major to have 3 stages, getting rid of minors and getting rid of MRQs and all that jazz, and just having 3 stages for a major. That means you would have to add a total of 3 days to the major, right? Now, you already have built-in break days between each stage, and I think that you need to keep those. I don't think it would really make sense to go straight from stage 1 to stage 2 with no gap. And obviously, you want a bit of a gap between the final stage and the playoffs for logistical reasons. You're setting up the arena, you're having people travel in, because, in the past, only the playoffs were, having a crowd. The group stages didn't have a crowd. Now, this major is a little bit different because there is going to be a venue for stages 1 through 3 where a crowd will actually be able to come in and watch, if I'm not mistaken. Now, with that said, that does mean that you do need a gap between stage 3 and the playoffs, not only for teams to rest and prepare and all that jazz, but also the logistics of moving everything into your final venue, the logistics of having people fly in, to watch and spectate, and all the different things that go along with that. So I understand there needs to be a gap between stage 3 and the playoffs as well. But even if you kept all things the same, you kept the 1-day gap between each stage, you kept the 3-day gap between stage 3 and the playoffs, you would still only need to add 3 more days to the tournament to be able to make this happen. And I get that those 3 days is a lot when it comes to cost, logistics, when it comes to, extra days in the hotel for players and talent and production crew and all that jazz. It's extra rates being paid to broadcast talent and staff to operate the broadcast for those extra few days. Like, I'm not saying that it's nothing, right? 3 additional days is indeed going to be a huge bump in cost and logistics and all that jazz. I'm not belittling that by any means, but I think it could be done. When we're talking about the most prestigious tournament that we have, it happens twice a year. It is the big tournament. I do think that trying to find a way to add 3 additional days to a tournament to make it superior format-wise to what it's been in the past with the BO1s, I think that's totally worth it. Now, maybe you only have a 2-day gap between stage 3 and the playoffs, and that gives you one of the 3 days that you need right there. And then you just need to find 2 more days. That could be a possibility. But again, even if you leave this untouched, just finding 3 days, I think, is totally worthwhile. Maybe that means that Valve needs to be more involved financially in helping these TOs operate these events. They already supply the prize pool. Yes, there's a sticker money aspect to it, so they are already doing a lot financially. But come on, Valve is making so much money off of this game. It's actually unreal. Like, between, the fact that they get a cut of every single transaction on the Steam market, all the keys that they sell, the cases that they sell, the skins that they sell, like, they're getting a cut of everything. They make so much money off this game. You can't tell me that there wouldn't be some way for Valve to help out these TOs a little bit financially in order to make these events a little bit easier to run, make it a little bit less of a cost on the TO, a little bit less of a burden on them, and to be able to do the things required to make this the best tournament possible, right? Again, you don't want to be lagging behind other tier 1 events in the circuit when it comes to having an inferior format in comparison to what PGL is doing with all their tier 1 events, what ESL is doing with all their tier 1 events, what Blast is doing. Hell, even Fissure, which was a smaller company, came out and had a format that didn't include best of ones, right? Like, we are just so far removed from BO1s, and to see Major still have them is something that I think needs to change. Again, I applaud the evolution of Major formats that have happened over the years. I applaud the Best of 5 Grand Final Edition. These are all fantastic things, but I don't think it would take that much to add 3 days to a Major and get rid of best of ones forever. I would love to see that happen, and I'm just going to leave it at that. Hope you folks enjoyed this video. If you did, please, again, subscribe, like, comment, and I'll catch you on the next one.